Hi everyone, welcome back to the Nico the Vet show showing on YouTube. Thank you very much for tuning in, and as always thank you to everybody who sent in either questions or just comments on the content of the channel. So for today's subject, I thought what we might focus on is heart problems, and specifically heart problems in dogs. Now the mechanics of the problem, as you'll see from me talking, will be applicable to any animal with a heart. So whether it be a dog or a cat or a human being or an echidna, whatever you like, the fundamental concepts remain the same. But for the purposes of today's talk, we're going to focus on dogs. I'll do a cat one under a separate banner, so it's just easier to reference. So first of all, if we look at the heart and the circulatory system, to simplify matters, think of the circulatory system in your body. Think of it as similar to a water pump system that you might have in your garden, in the sense that the components are, you have a pump, so you have a pump which constantly moves and it squirts fluid around. The fluid then travels around the circuit in pipes, and there's fluid in the pipes that gets moved around. So your circulatory system is exactly the same. You've got the pump, which is the heart. You've got the pipes, which are the arteries and the veins, and then you've got the fluid in the pipes, which in the case of our bodies is the blood. And this is a continuous circuit. So you've got the heart at the, put it this way, I've got the heart at the center of the system. You've got some pipes that go out and around, and then back to the heart. And think of this out and around business. This is the rest of the body. So you've got the pump, you've got the pipes, and you've got the fluid. So when you develop a heart problem, what we usually mean is there's a problem with the pump. So if you imagine again, go back to our system. So you've got the pump, you've got the pipes, you've got the fluid, and let's imagine that the amount of fluid in those pipes is fixed. So let's pick an easy number just for the sake of arithmetic, and let's say there's 10 liters of fluid or 10 liters of blood in that system, and that amount of blood is fixed. So every time the heart beats, it contracts. Every time it beats, it squirts fluid out into the circuit, which will go out and back around. Imagine the heart, every time it pumps out 1 liter of fluid or 1 liter of blood going this way. And that means the other 9 liters of blood in the system get shunted along, and a liter returns to the heart. The heart then pumps the next liter, which starts its journey around, and the next liter comes back in. So there's constantly 1 liter going in, 1 liter going out, and provided that is happening, the system will work perfectly well. So in heart failure, the meaning is in the name really. Heart failure means the heart is failing to do its job, which is to act as a pump. So now what starts happening is the pump is failing, so it's not pumping fluid as efficiently as it should have. So now every time the heart pumps, instead of a liter going forwards and a liter coming back, let's say for argument's sake you've now only got half a liter going forwards, because the pump is failing, so it's failing to do its job. It's not working as well as it should. So it pumps, only half a liter goes forward to supply the body, but the fluid in the system, remember, is constant, so a liter comes back. So you've got, because you only pumped half the liter, you've got another half liter waiting, and you've got 1 liter coming back. So now you've got a liter and a half waiting to go. The heart then pumps again, and again only half a liter goes. So now you have a liter waiting and another liter coming back. So now you've got 2 liters wanting to be pumped. So the heart pumps again, only a half a liter goes again. So you've now got a half a liter remaining with those 2 liters that were there. You've got 2.5 liters waiting to go, and only half has gone. So you can see the effect of the system is what we have: a forward failure and a backward failure. Forward failure means the heart is failing to pump appropriate amount of blood forwards, because there's only a half a liter going every time, and the body needs a liter. And that causes a problem, because now with the blood not going forwards, remember simplistically, blood carries energy and oxygen. So now your body's not getting enough energy and it's not getting enough oxygen. And then to make matters worse, as the fluid returns in the system and it starts backlogging here, because it's not being pumped forward liter for liter, you're damming up here. As it starts to dam up, the blood vessels on this side of the heart start to stretch open, because they've got to hold the blood while it's waiting to go. And as those blood vessels stretch open and open and open and open, a bit of fluid starts to leak out of the vessels, and that can leak either into your lungs or into your belly, and I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. So this is called a backward failure. So forward failure means you're not getting enough blood, so you're not carrying enough oxygen and enough glucose to the body. Backward failure means it's behind the heart, it's waiting to go, it's backlogging, and you're going to start leaking fluid out, and your body tissues are going to start to become waterlogged. So that's basically the principle. It's a pump, a pipe, and some fluid. A little bit more detail. If you look at the pump consists, which is the heart, of course, the pump consists of a left side and a right side. And each side has a top chamber and a bottom chamber. So think about, again, the pump. So you've got fluid coming back from the system. We said there's the heart, there's the system coming back. You've got fluid coming back. It goes into the right chamber. Now the right chamber sits above the left chamber. So the top chamber is where the blood comes back. So that blood comes back and back and back and back. So this is nice and full. Once this is full, the valve opens, this chamber contracts, and the bottom chamber fills. When the bottom chamber is filled, this valve closes, and then this chamber will contract, and there's a pipe coming out, going off this way, going to the lungs, and it will pump the fluid, which in the case of our bodies is the blood, pump it out to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. For that to work efficiently, this valve has to have closed. Otherwise, if this valve has not closed, as the bottom chamber contracts, yes, some of the blood is going to go through the pipe, but some of it's going to regurgitate through here and go back into the top chamber. And remember, that top chamber is filling with another litre to pump forwards again. And if the bottom chamber contracts and some fluid squirts back up, that's filling the top chamber. It's already half full when the litre comes back. So the top chamber will start to stretch and stretch and stretch. So that's on the right side of the heart. Then once the blood has been off to the lungs and picked up the oxygen, it comes back to the left heart. Again, there's a top chamber and a bottom chamber, and the bottom chamber has a big pipe leading out of it. So the blood comes back from the lungs, the top chamber fills up, accepts it, the valve opens, the top chamber squeezes, the blood goes through the valve, the bottom chamber fills until it's full, the valve then closes, and as the bottom chamber contracts, it will squirt the blood out of the pipe. And similarly, if this valve isn't working properly, as this chamber is filled, it squirts the blood, fills that, and then as the stronger bottom chamber contracts, some of that blood is going to squirt back up and back into the top chamber, which is waiting still to receive blood from the lungs. And again, you've just got too much fluid in that top chamber, and it stretches to accommodate the fluid. That is the simplistic model. If we then apply that to the problems we see in real terms in dogs, very crudely, just to keep it simple, when you have dogs less than about border collie size develop heart problems, it's usually a problem with the valves we just spoke about between the top and the bottom chamber of the heart. When I say a problem with the valves don't close properly. I'll come back to that in a minute. And when we're talking about dogs bigger than, say, border collie size, when they develop heart problems, it's usually because the heart muscle, remember the heart is just a big bag of muscle that needs to contract and get smaller to pump, and then bigger and then smaller. What happens in the bigger dogs is that the heart muscle just sort of stretches out. So the heart becomes much bigger, but when you stretch anything, the walls go thinner. Think about blowing up a balloon. The more you blow it up, the thinner the walls get. So as the heart just stretches and stretches and stretches in the bigger dogs, the muscle wall becomes thinner and thinner and just becomes flabby. So when it tries to contract, instead of making a nice big contraction like that, the best it can do is sort of that. And you can imagine if it's only doing that, you're going to have a forward failure. The blood's just not going to go forwards properly. So little dogs, smaller than border collie size, usually the problem is leaky valves, and big dogs, usually it's stretched, flabby muscle walls. So, so if you have certain breeds, you'd be expecting certain problems. So the giant breeds like Dobermans, Great Danes, Irish Wolfhounds, that kind of thing, you'd be thinking stretched. We call that dilated cardiomyopathy. Dilated just means it's dilated. Cardio means hot. Myo means muscle. Opathy means it's something wrong with it. So it's a dilated, flabby muscle. Whereas in the smaller dogs, it's usually a valve failure. And you have two valves. On the left side, you've got the mitral valve, which has two little leaflets. And on the right side of the heart, you've got the tricuspid valve, which is it's a three-part valve, which is separating the top and the bottom chamber. So either way, it doesn't matter whether, so if the valves are leaky, it means every time the top of the heart pumps, it puts the blood into the bottom of the heart, which is grand. The bottom of the heart fills, but then as it tries to squeeze, the valve's still open. So instead of the blood going to your lungs or to your body, half of it goes back into the heart, and the heart just stretches, and you end up where you were with the big heart in the bigger dogs, a big flabby stretched heart muscle, which is not working as well as it should. So what are the symptoms that you would expect to see with heart failure? It's sort of the obvious if you think about it. So if you have a forward failure, you're just not getting oxygen and energy forwards into the body. So you develop what we call exercise tolerance. So as you're just sitting there ticking along doing nothing, watching this video, your heart's just banging along at your sort of resting heart rate, and the body's quite happy with the amount of oxygen and energy it's receiving. But if you go out for a run or a walk, or you start exercising, your body, particularly your muscles, is going to call out for more energy and more oxygen. And normally what happens is your heart will just start to go faster and faster, and that way it can provide the increased needs of your body. But if you have a heart problem and you're in heart failure, then when your body calls for that extra oxygen and energy, your heart is can't do it. It just can't do it because it's a failing heart, and you will have what we call exercise intolerance. So basically, you run out of breath, you run out of puff very quickly when you go and exercise, and you have to sit down to catch your breath. And once your body sort of stabilizes again, and your tissues are happy with the amount of oxygen and energy the heart is supplying, then you feel fine again. So you set off again on your walk or your run, and you run out of puff very, very quickly. And again, it's a forward failure. You're not getting enough oxygen and energy going forward. But then compounding that is you get the backward failure. So all the blood coming back, waiting to be pumped, is damming up, waiting to go somewhere. And that will it gets just so much pressure in the blood vessels. They get so stretched and full of blood that the watery part of the blood, the fluid part, not the actual red blood, just the liquidy part, a bit like when you graze yourself, you see that sort of clear, sticky fluid oozing out. That starts to ooze out and accumulate in the tissues. And if it accumulates in your lungs, which we would see with a left heart failure, that waterlogs your lungs. Effectively, you're drowning in your own fluids. So what the symptom we would see there, we would see increased breathing. So you're breathing faster because each breath isn't as efficient at filling your lungs with oxygen. So your body's answer to that is, well, if I can't get as much oxygen as I need because I've got waterlogged lungs, I'm going to breathe twice as fast. So you generally see an increased heart rate, and you'd see an increased respiratory effort as your dog really struggles to get enough oxygen. Another symptom, if you're astute and you're monitoring your dog's heart rate, is, again, if you think of the pump, needs to pump a litre of water forwards as a litre comes back. If it's only pumping a half a litre a time, again, you'll be okay as long as you're not exerting in the early stages. But as this progresses, and let's say you're pumping not even half a litre now, you're pumping a quarter of a litre, then that's just not enough, even if you're sitting around doing absolutely nothing. And so because that's not enough, your body starts calling out saying, we need more blood, and your heart will do the only thing it can. It'll have to go faster. So if it normally would pump once every minute and pump a litre every minute, if it's now only pumping a quarter of a litre every time, it has to go 4 times as fast. So your heart rate will be 4 times as fast to try to keep that 1 litre a minute pumping around. So you get a rapid heart rate, increased heart rate, an increased breathing rate, and exercise intolerance. Coughing can also be a symptom of heart failure. In the early stages, as the heart muscle with the bigger dogs, either just the whole muscle stretches out, or in little dogs, it's often the top chambers which start first. The windpipe, as it comes through from your voice box to your lungs, lies on top of the heart. So as the heart chambers, whether it's just the top chambers or the whole heart, as it starts to stretch, it lifts up like that and it pushes up on the windpipe. And it's exactly the same as if I'd pushed on my windpipe from the outside. That pressure on the windpipe can trigger a cough. So you're in the beginning stages of heart failure. You may or may not, it's an inconsistent finding. You may have a cough, and it sounds like sort of a dry cough, almost like a kennel cough, like you've just got a dry cough like you and I might get with a cold. In the latter stages, because of the waterlogging effect, you get what we call a productive cough. So it's a moist cough. It sounds like a wet cough, just like you and I can get when we get chest infections. So that's the mechanism of failure. Again, it's equally applicable to any animal with a heart, but we're focusing on the little dogs. The poster boy for heart problems would be Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. They are probably one of the breeds most commonly associated with leaky valves. So let's say we understand the mechanism and we've now recognized this problem in our dog. What can we do about it? And the answer is the medications. Really, there are 4 medications which help these guys. Or rewind a little bit, how do we confirm the diagnosis that it is the heart? Because just because you've got a heart murmur doesn't mean you have a heart problem or heart failure. And again, just to be pedantic, heart failure means the heart is failing to do its job. But just because you've got a murmur doesn't mean the heart will be failing. In human beings, quite extraordinarily, about 1 in 100 of us has a heart problem and never know about it, or certainly are never bothered by it. And similarly in dogs, you can hear a heart murmur in a great many dogs, but let's say that heart murmur is caused. What causes the murmur? The murmur is just turbulence of blood flowing through the heart. So what should happen is the top chamber opens, it fills, the valve opens, the top chamber contracts, goes through the valve into the bottom chamber, and that happens really smoothly, and the blood or the fluid goes from top to the bottom very easily, and there's no turbulence. Once you've got problems with the valves, as the bottom chamber contracts and this top chamber is a bit leaky, blood squirts back up into the top chamber, and we hear that as turbulence, as the water sort of tumbles to go into the top chamber while the top chamber is filling from the other side. So you've got fluid coming in this way, fluid coming this way, and the whole lot is turbulent, and you hear that. So think about central heating systems, particularly in the UK. We have water-based radiators and pipes. You shouldn't hear the water circulating in your central heating system. Or if you're looking at a river flowing past you, if there are no rocks and boulders in the river, you hardly hear the river at all. It just slides past you. The water doesn't make a noise. But if you have a problem in your central heating system, or if you have boulders in the river, what that does either way is it instead of the water or the fluid flowing freely, it starts to tumble. It goes over rapids, and that's why we hear the sound of the rapids, or we hear the sound of the fluid in your central heating system with the turbulence. So tumbling causes noise, and that's what we hear as the murmur. So just because we hear a murmur, it tells us, okay, there is some turbulence in there. There shouldn't be turbulence in there, and there's going to be a valve problem, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is severe enough to make the heart fail. So if we go back to the pump, the pipes and the fluid, and you're meant to be pumping, say, a litre with every pump, and you've got a little bit of a leak in your valve, and every time you contract the bottom chamber, instead of, say, half a litre coming back up, you get tiny bit, 1 milliliter coming back up, and that means all the 99.9% of the blood is going in the right direction. It is satisfying the body's needs, in which case you are not in failure, because the heart isn't failing to do its job. It's doing its job perfectly fine. It just has this little bit of a leak, and we have to make that distinction, because again, just because you've got a funny sounding heart doesn't mean you are in heart failure. So what your vet will do to determine are you in failure, yes or no, is we will assess, like I said, the heart rate and the heart and the respiratory rate. Easy numbers for you to remember is the heart rate should always be less than 140 at rest. If it's above 140, it means the heart's panicking a little bit and it's going faster to compensate for the fact that it's failing. And if your respiration rate is above 40, so heart rate is 140, breathing rate is 40. So if you're breathing faster than 40, there's every chance that you've waterlogged your lungs and you're breathing faster to compensate it. Your vet will do other tests. You take an x-ray of the chest, for example, and we look for fluid logging in the lungs. So if the lungs look like there's fluid accumulating there and we can see a big fat stretched heart, that's very, very suggestive that you've now got into heart failure again, which is different to having just a murmur. And then the ultimate way of diagnosing it is with an ultrasound, so echocardiography, where they put the probe on us and you look inside the heart and you measure. And that's wonderful because you can measure everything. You can measure how much each pump of the heart is pumping forwards. You can measure the heart muscle as it contracts, how efficiently is it doing that, and you can determine exactly how well the heart is or isn't working. So once we've determined, yes, you are in failure, the treatment that's available to us works on the different points in the system. So we can, first of all, remember, pump, pipes fluid, we can act directly on the pump. So there are drugs which act on the pump. Digoxin used to be the pump when I was trained, back when Noah was a boy, but by and large it's been superseded by pimabendin, which retails in different countries under different names. Cardisure or Vetmedin are the most common versions. And basically, so you give a medicine to say, all right, the heart's not pumping as well as it should, the top chambers or the whole heart is stretched, so the whole thing is a little bit less efficient and each beat isn't doing that. So the answer is, well, let's optimize it. Let's say, okay, we can't fix the heart. The only thing that's going to fix you is you need a new heart, but that's not quite so simple. So what we need to do is get the best out of what we have. So drugs like pimabendin say, all right, your flabby heart, which isn't working that well, let's get it working as well as it possibly can. And they're calcium channel sensitizers, and it just gets, instead of just doing that flabbily, it gets the heart pumping again, so blood goes out with each pump. So excellent. So medication for the pump to optimize pump function. Then remember, you also have a system of pipes, and as you go into heart failure, the kidneys have a little bit of a freak out. The kidneys are very greedy organs. They want a lot of blood, they need a lot of energy, and they need a lot of oxygen that the blood carries. Every time your heart pumps, about a quarter of that blood will go to your kidneys. So as soon as the kidneys say, well, hang on, we're not getting as much blood as we need to do our job as well as we need to, they will respond. And what they do is they release a chemical which has the effect of contracting the blood vessels. So the pipes in the system, instead of going this big, the kidneys will make the pipe squeeze like that. Why does it do that? Think of it as if you're standing there with a hose pipe in your hand, watering your garden, and the hose pipe sort of squirting water only that far. If you wanted it to go further, you would squeeze your finger over the point of the hose pipe to make the opening smaller, and that way the water would jet further and it would go further. So think of it as the kidneys are sitting over here, the heart's over there, and the kidneys are saying, right, we need more blood. So by squeezing, by trying to squeeze the blood vessels and make them narrower, the kidneys are trying to get the blood to squirt further and more efficiently from the heart to get to them. So that's good for the kidneys, but it's bad for the heart, because you've now got this failing heart pump, which is trying to pump fluid through a system of pipes, but you've now just made the pipe smaller. So this poor old heart, it's much harder for it to pump into a narrow little pipe than into a big pipe. So this failing pump, we've got something working on the pump because we've given it that medicine, but now it's struggling to get all the fluid into that pipe, and it's even become less efficient now because it's getting less per pump forwards, so you're getting more accumulating in the heart and more stretching. So the second category of medication we would use are called the ACE inhibitors. There's benazepril, for example, is a common example of that. And those work by relaxing the pipes. So now it's much easier. You've got, instead of the heart trying to pump all this 10 liters of blood around through this tiny system, you've now got a big pipe and it can flow more easily in the forward direction. So we've acted on the pipe secondarily. The third thing we can do is to say, we've helped the pump, we've made the pipes bigger, let's do something about the fluid. So if you've got too much fluid just accumulating in your system, that puts extra strain on the heart, and you start getting this leaking out, backlogging effect. So in simplistic terms, what we can give you is diuretics. So diuretics will make you pee more, basically, is how they work. And if we put a medicine into your body that tells the kidneys, right, make more wee, think of it as the kidneys looking around the body going, well, I need to make more wee. Where can I get some fluid from? And it will draw this fluid, which is waterlogging in the lungs and accumulating in the belly. It will say, okay, well, there's some spare fluid the body doesn't need. I don't want that there. I'll use that to answer the command to make more wee. And so basically it draws the waterlogged fluid out of you, but also it decreases the total amount of fluid in the pipes. Because remember, you're asking the kidneys to chuck fluid away, and it will do that by reducing your total circulating blood volume. So now you've just helped on every front, because you've asked the pump to work better, you've asked the pipes to get to back, not bigger, but back to their normal size, so it's easier to pump into them, and you've put less fluid in the system, so it's easier to move all of that fluid around. We can also get a fourth drug, which we add in, called spironolactone. We used to start using it because it is a weak diuretic. It does ask the kidneys to get rid of some more fluid, which benefits us the way we've just discussed. But probably more importantly, when the heart is being stretched and it's being hurt by this process of backlogging and valve failure, or just stretchy heart in the bigger dogs, what that does is it hurts the heart muscle. And think of muscle fibers as being locked into each other like this. So as the heart stretches, the muscle fibers start to tear apart like that, because this is how muscle works. It works backwards and forwards. As it starts to tear, that leads to some scarring in your heart, and that just messes up the heart function even more, because it's meant to be a nice flexy, bendy, muscle that bounces along. So we can use spironolactone to try to minimize that amount of scarring. Again, it doesn't fix you, but it just helps the pump work better for longer. So most dogs, when we give them this combination of medications, and there's been some debate over the years about should you start the whole lot all at once or should you start one at a time. I think if you are in confirmed heart failure with fluid waterlogging in your system, really you need the whole lot. Just go the whole way. If you're not quite waterlogging yet, so you don't have the backward failure, but you have a forward failure, you're just not getting enough blood forwards to give your body the blood and the oxygen it needs, then yes, we could act on just the pump and just the pipes. You don't have to do anything about the fluid because you are not in congestive heart failure. And it's called congestive heart failure because of exactly that. You become congested with your own blood. So with these medications, there's a lot we can do to significantly improve the lives of dogs in heart failure, particularly the little dogs, so the ones with the valve failure. The bigger dogs where the heart muscle has become stretched, their response to treatment is often much more disappointing, and I think the clever people who understand this sort of thing and design and invent medications, I'm sure they'll come up in the fullness of time with something that we can do that's more efficient for the bigger dogs. At the moment, their response to treatment isn't quite so good, just like it is in us as human beings as we stretch, and really the ultimate sanction is they need a new heart, but again that's not quite so easy to come by. So so little dogs, much better outlook with the appropriate medications. We're not fixing them, remember, we're just optimizing the function of the heart, the pipes and the fluids, but we're not fixing you, we're managing you. But you'd be pretty optimistic with the little dogs that you can significantly extend not just their length of their lives, but also the quality of their lives. The bigger dogs, you've much more trepidation about how much they're actually going to benefit. And then once we medicate them, the medication isn't carved in stone. It's not, the doses aren't set in stone. We will have to keep adjusting the doses as your heart continues to fail. Because remember, the medication is helping you, but it's not fixing you. So the failure process is going to get worse, and we're trying to just slow that process and compensate for that process as best we can. Ultimately, the heart will fail and it will become refractory to treatment, meaning it just won't respond to the treatments. And when we find ourselves sort of maxed out on all the medications, if we cannot restore your quality of life, then ultimately we would have to consider the ultimate sanction of letting you go. And it's not giving up on these guys at all. It's giving them a merciful exit, because we're all going to go one day. But I think one of the worst ways to go is effectively to drown in your own fluid. So c'est la vie. As long as the treatment is working, just get it into you. Let's monitor you. Let's help you. Let's give you the quality of life. But when it's when the 11th hour comes, then yes, we have to take the ultimate sanction and let you go, which is just a gentler passing than not doing it. So I hope that makes some sort of sense to everyone. It's very simplistic, but I think it hopefully gets the message across. Once again, thank you for tuning in to the Nico the Vet channel, and keep your questions coming, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.